What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, you saw someone last night who is on my bucket list of people I need to see. You saw Zach Bryan. How was it?
It was amazing, man. It was amazing. I was like joking off air with you that it's like he's putting out just an unhealthy amount of music now. Like I got John tickets for his birthday, went with John and Andrea, and it was so funny because I feel like me and John are not like day one Zach Bryan fans, but like day two. Like I would leave that to like Emery and the guys that were like really on him early. But that being said, it was like I think it's 22 song set list, so we knew like 6 or 8 songs. I will give you guys a pro tip, I guess, since I'm like a Southern micro influencer. If you guys go see Zach Bryan, it's awesome. For his encore, it's really good. I'm not going to tell you the song, but he moves to the middle of the GA, like the middle of the floor. So as soon as the lights go off, just start meandering to the middle of the venue because there will just be a big crush of people trying to find Zach Bryan. But yeah, it was amazing. It was a back-to-back show. I went with the Sunday because it was a little bit cheaper. Got to see him play Something in the Orange, which was sick. He's not even playing that on this tour. He has so much music. He's just not even really playing the hits, which I respect because people knew. Like I felt like the jerk, which was the crazy part. I guess VP used to say, it's like, are we the jerk here that we don't know 80 Zach Bryan songs? But yeah, I guess it was every song live was good. I'll say that.
That's kind of the name of the game. If you're Taylor Swift or Morgan Wallen or Zach Bryan, just put out as much music as possible so that your streaming numbers are insanely good. And Luke Combs I think puts out a lot of music, but maybe not to the level that those three do. And that's how you start playing in football stadiums. I mean, if we're being 100% honest, but Zach Bryan in concert, I know a lot of people have been able to see him. It feels like he's been everywhere this summer. Would love to be able to see him very, very soon. So yeah, now I got the
And
nod
you
of
guys could
approval.
tell the differences in me and Connor because I said, yeah, he's been putting out a lot of music. Like, and in my mind, I thought Future. And Connor's like Taylor Swift, Morgan Wallen. I was like, yes, correct. All good answers. This is why we work well together.
Yeah, exactly. Same exact thing, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. All right. So today we have loaded show coming up. Matt Hayes in a bit. Preseason look at the top 25 coordinators, both side of the ball. A little bit of Lincoln Riley, Brian Kelly talk with him as well, kind of related to the news that he broke a couple of months ago. But first, Will, we have a preseason AP top 25. It is finally out. So I thought instead of just, well, we're going to do a little bit of patting voters on the back, but instead of calling out anyone individually, we will instead just talk about what the AP poll as a whole got wrong in the preseason. Because if it's not our way, it's the highway, last I checked. So that's pretty much the logic that I've been subscribing to for a very long time. But if you, for whatever reason, did not see it, we won't go through the entire top 25. Let's just go through the top 10. Number 10 is Florida State, number 9 is Michigan, 8 Penn State, 7 Notre Dame, 6 Ole Miss, 5 Alabama, 4 Texas, 3 Oregon, 2 Ohio State, and number 1 is Georgia, which means that Georgia will indeed try to become just the second team in the last 2 decades to start number 1 in the AP preseason poll and win a national championship. Good luck with that. You know that Alabama, 2017, that's the only other team that has done that since 2005. That's not really news. Felt like Georgia was pretty obvious to be preseason number 1 when they're 28th in the country in percentage of returning production from a 13-win team. Look, just lost at the wrong time last year. We've been over all of this, so we won't spend much time on Georgia. Just an overarching thought, okay? I've said this before. I will say it again. Just it bears repeating when all these preseason polls come out. If at any point someone is talking about strength of schedule with a preseason ranking. Now, again, not trying to predicting the playoff, that's actually important. But if anyone is talking about strength of schedule with a preseason ranking, they're doing it wrong. Okay? They just are. I hate it so much because what do you do week 3 or week 4, Will? What do you do? Are you all of a sudden like, oh, well, now I actually have to go based off resume and not what I think their future schedule looks like because everything is up in smoke by the end of September because that's the way that this sport typically works. I hate it. Just don't do it. If you're in a position where you're coming out with your own rankings or something like that, don't factor that in. When I do my rankings for SDS, I do not have an AP poll vote, by the way. I should probably say that disclaimer, not part of this, separate. We do our own rankings at SDS. That's going to become a weekly staple. We're going to have our consensus rankings that come out on a weekly basis. but I did do the preseason top 25 from SDS, which were not like I was part of that ranking, but I wasn't all of that ranking. But when I come up with my rankings, I do it based on what a team did last year, the track record of a head coach, the assistant hires, the transfer portal moves, and then, as you've heard me reference already on this show and a million times this offseason, Bill Connolly's percentage of returning production. And I try and go to the post spring version of that came out in May and not the like February version of that when he's still figuring out what the portal is going to look like. I do that because I've gotten in trouble with this before, where
Mm-hmm.
maybe I give too much of the benefit of the doubt to a team that's got a returning starting quarterback I like. Certain Sam Howell at North Carolina a few years ago comes to mind. But I do that so that I can try and factor in all those other things and not just focus on one thing that I like about a team. A returning quarterback can break a tie, but if I'm using that as like the majority of my argument for why a team should start off in the top 10 or something, I'm probably doing it wrong myself. Does that make sense?
Yes. How do you account for if a team has that dog in them?
It's high. It's really high. It's got to be because I'm not ranking a team that doesn't have a dog in them top 5, top 10.
Mm-hmm.
No way. I mean, and we'll get to a team that, in my opinion, didn't deserve to start off in the top 10 because I don't think they have that dog in them. You could probably take a wild guess where I'm going with that one, but it's got to be heavily weighed. The bigger the dog, the better the preseason ranking.
Yes, and that's why the dogs are on top. No, but I will say this, just to kind of set the table here. I clicked on AP poll, the official website, seeing a fresh AP poll, seeing my face be blinded by the bright white AP screen that says new AP poll week 1. So exciting. Also funny to see the biggest risers and droppers since the last AP poll. Just want to talk. Am I getting ahead of myself here? Should I save this?
No, I just don't care about that like at all. I
Right.
always see that they will make note of that, which is actually a really
Mm-hmm.
good indication that you're looking at a current AP poll because
Yeah.
while I do think the AP poll kind of does the Lord's work in a lot of ways, I also think that very oftentimes when I click on it, it always defaults to the previous week's poll. And I hate
Mm-hmm.
that. They have something with their cookies or something like that where you got to like delete your cache to be able to get the new poll, which that's too much work for me. So they need to make
Delete
that
your
a little.
cache.
I don't know what they're doing, but yeah, it's very refreshing to see a new poll rolled out.
You click 3 wrong buttons in the AP site, suddenly Alabama has another national title. It's really scary. The portal, So point being, I'll say this. I'll say this is just a funny thing to look at because you could directly see from last year to this year kind of the hopium starting to rise in some of these teams. So the teams that have risen the most with 0 games being played starts with Ohio State. The last time we saw them, we're getting struggling like a fish out of water to put up points with a backup quarterback. I understand with a backup offense, I guess technically, right? With a backup offense against Blake Baker and Mizzou, who is already about to be out the door. But let's not talk about that, right? So a Trader who is about to be gone. So point being, Ohio State moved up 8. Okay, Notre Dame moved up 7. It's exactly what we always joke about. It's like watching you see a team blow it in front of you, and then over the course of the offseason, they get tucked into. Notre Dame again up 7 after the last time we saw them. The biggest dropper would be Michigan at -8, which all makes sense, right? Cool. And so a couple of things that were just a little bit interesting, we'll get to it, is Texas. So Texas as a -1 since the last time we saw them. First time that's got to have happened in like 20 years, where Texas starts off the season at a lower ranking than they finished the last season. That's actually news, I think.
That's a good point. That's a good point because everybody's talking about how Texas just isn't in that category. They don't belong. How dare you include them among national championship contenders? And Texas is starting off one spot lower than where it finished, despite the fact that they return one of the household names in the sport. They have coordinator continuity. They
Yeah.
have 67% of last year's production back. And while I do think the CJ Baxter injury is significant, I don't know how many of these AP polls were cast before that. I don't know how many of them would change if they knew that information. So I don't necessarily know how much that's going to make or break things. But yeah, for all the overrating of Texas that we in the college football public have done over the course of the last decade plus, yeah, Texas disrespected, dropping a
Yeah.
peg by falling to that 4th spot.
That's actually pretty. It's a sign of respect, really, that they started off higher last year. They actually did what they said they were going to do. Kind of a couple of really funny ones in here. I misspoke. Arizona dropped 10 spots without playing a game. We see why. Coaching staff, we get it. No Fafita disrespect, nonetheless, but we see it. I will say, very funny that like you could see who is liked and not liked. Very funny to me that USC is at 23. because it's like, okay, you guys have decided that like Riley is trash, but you're gonna end up ranking him for this whole year anyway. You're gonna find a way to have him hanging at 23. So let's not lie to ourselves. Texas A&M and Miami are right next to each other at 19 and 20.
I've
So
got thoughts
funny.
on that. I've got thoughts
So
on that.
funny. Just
Yeah.
wanted to drop that. We'll cut to the bigger thing. But where else would you put them but right next to each other? That's all I got to say on that.
Yeah, you start to get past like 16, 17, 18, and it thins out. It thins out in a hurry. It really does. And if you haven't put one of these rankings together, I would encourage you to be able to do so. But yeah, a lot of I got a lot of thoughts. Let's actually let's start in that range there, because Miami coming in at 19th. I expected to be a little bit more upset with Miami's ranking than I actually was, because I did indeed put Miami at number 22. So this isn't like some massive discrepancy, despite the fact that I've spoken pretty outwardly against the Miami hype train coming into the season. But I included them in this discussion because if they are able to come away with a here's what I foresee happening, right? Miami, if they come out and beat Florida in that season opener, there will be people banging the drum that Miami is a top 10 team. And you can see that. You can see that playing out, and I will roll my eyes, and they will go all the way to the back of my head, and I will go, oh, we're doing this? We're doing this? We're going to give Miami that much credit? Now, if they come out and win that game 35-0 in the Swamp, and they make a very loud statement, would I say, oh, yeah, they're maybe better than what I put them at for number 22? Okay, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. That's what teams in that position should do in theory. But again, it's still a team that I think has a lot of question marks, because the history, we've talked about it, like last 15 years, Miami's one finish better than number 19 in the country. That's with 5 different head coaches, Will. 5 different head coaches. And their current head coach, Mario Cristobal, 12-13 at Miami. Okay. Yeah, he inherited a situation from Manny Diaz that wasn't exactly a total overhaul, but again, exposed to the 30-day window. I'll give you a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, because I don't like to judge year one coaches. Okay. So that is what it is. But again, like, here's the thing. He's got one finish better than 19th in those 6 seasons at Oregon and at Miami. And it was with a peak Justin Herbert. Okay. Everybody loves Cam Ward.
Screens.
Not that Oregon team. No, that Oregon team had a little bit more of a pro style feel, like different than what Will Stein is doing now, in catering to their offensive strengths. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt there. But I think so much of this is because everybody loves Cam Ward. He's a big part of this preseason ranking. A lot of people are really high in the backfield, which added Damian Martinez from Oregon State, one of the most noteworthy post-spring window transfers that we had. And then I think the fact that Miami has all this production back, they're the top 1/4 of FBS and percentage of returning production. Like all those things, positive. But again, if I'm talking about a Miami team in the top 10 after week 1, I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to lose my mind and say, why do we do this? Why do we just get so ahead of ourselves with these teams? But I'm not as mad as I thought I was going to be with the Canes.
Yeah, I just feel like I'm stuck in the twilight zone with Miami. We've talked about it before. It's like these coaches all come in and blame everyone that came before them. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It's, they had Tyler Van Dyke, who I think is a great college quarterback, and I think he's been horribly
good college quarterback. Good college quarterback. Great.
Fair.
That's tough.
Fair. I think he has the tools to be a great college quarterback, and he has been mismanaged like 4 bad different ways. And the thing is, we've seen him be great for a game or two, and then suddenly, I mean, under Manny Diaz, who was a bum, we don't like Manny Diaz anymore. We think he was a terrible coach. Even
Will's joking. We like Manny Diaz.
I love Manny Diaz. Yeah. I think he won the Broyles Award last year at Penn State, right? He's a good coach, but suddenly it's all his fault. So point being, like, I do push back a little bit on the Miami. Oh, it was Miami. They had nothing to work with. Every time they sell us this hopium, and then they start over, and they're like, well, see, we had nothing to work with. You guys were selling. They had this guy like this James Williams. He's like a 6'5", looks like the Avatar playing safety. I remember seeing him in high school and being like, I don't know how you throw on this guy, and they just can't make him work. Like, it's the same story over and over again. So yeah, I'm with you. People are still doing the top 10 Miami thing after 1 win. Can you just like take the cassette tape out of your TV, because it's not the team you're used to seeing, brother?
Take the cassette tape out of your TV.
I don't know what data you're pulling from, but it's not on DVD. All right,
you're way too young to know how the whole VCR thing works.
I'm not that young. I had Lion King on cassette out of the Disney. Come on now.
We call it on VHS.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cassette's
Oh,
music, right?
you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
See, you are too young.
it's a
Exactly.
VHS cassette. All right. Anyway,
Sure. All right. Speaking of things that haven't exactly modernized, Iowa 25 is underrated. Well,
now for the VHS tape of college football.
exactly.
Iowa
Literally.
guys.
That is Iowa. And look, I know this is the post Tory Taylor era. Okay, I'm not going to make light of that. Iowa might actually have to play some offense this year.
Mm-hmm.
Early indications coming out of their scrimmage. I don't know if you saw that over the weekend. Oh my God, some of the stat lines that you're seeing from Cade McNamara, not great. Not exactly the most promising thing. When literally the only way to go is up for Iowa's offense. But again, it is a 10-win team that is top 10 in America in percentage of returning production with no more Brian Ferentz.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No more Brian Ferentz. You've got to set it and forget it defense with Phil Parker. I have fewer questions about Iowa than I do about teams like Miami and USC. And I know that's kind of crazy to be able to say, but even I think you could point to perceived strengths of Miami and USC and say, well, no, I'd actually feel better about Iowa's defense being the more consistent unit than even a Lincoln Riley coached offense that has a ton of new pieces, or Miami's trying to make all these pieces work, with all the portal additions that they've had with their offense, which is supposed to be their strength. Iowa, I'm not going to worry about that defense, man. Like, forget about it. They're going to be a top 20 unit. Like, that's still going to be their bread and butter, even if this offense still is basura, which there's a very good chance of that. But I do think that there's a little bit of this, what do you do well? And if you don't do the things that people like to talk about in the preseason, then they're like what they talk about at Iowa, which is punting. TBD on that. Again, that's work in progress. But if you don't do those things well, you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt. I had Iowa all the way up at 15. I did, despite the fact that I realized throwing a forward pass still might be a struggle. I accept that, but they just do so many other things incredibly well. And I would tend to give them the benefit of the doubt over some of these less proven teams that are ranked ahead of them.
I know we've talked a lot about Brian Ferentz and he's no longer on the team, but I just wanted to update you guys on something. Brian Ferentz is currently an offensive analyst on Maryland, and that's a head coaching staff which has Loxley, right, who's an offensive mind, great offensive
Gaddis.
mind. Their co-offensive coordinators are Josh Gaddis and Kevin Sumlin.
Yep.
What do you guys think that Brian Ferentz, Mike Loxley, Josh Gaddis, and Kevin Sumlin are just shooting the crap about? That has got to be the most fascinating room in America. Anyway.
I can't. Well, I don't know if I can think of an offensive room that would take less responsibility for their actions than that one. I mean,
they have 6 different coaching. Like, how would you have a Gaddis offense next to a Sumlin offense? Those are fundamentally different things. You throw in 2 guys on either side of that too. Anyway, so I'm going to be tuning into Maryland now. Anyway, so yeah, no, I'm with you. It's like it's one of those things where Iowa has shown, right? Like we know that with certain like schools you're going to get certain things, right? And with Iowa, we've seen they can develop O-line and they could just find some dudes on defense. And it's never about, oh, we got this great recruit. It's like, we found this guy in a mine shaft. He's awesome. He's been here 5 years. He's a great student. And suddenly he's just playing like a 5-star athlete. And sure, they have some guys that have been like a little bit higher recruited lately, but I think that it just really is set it and forget it with like that whole defense. And to your point, maybe they won't be a defense so good that they could buoy that bad offense, but having an offense not that bad, I feel like it's just, I genuinely feel as though me and you with YouTube could do better than they did last year. So like, I think that there's nowhere to go but up, other than the Big Ten getting a little bit harder. Question mark.
flirting with mediocrity is all I ask
Yeah.
for. All I ask for. That's simply what Iowa should aspire to do on the offensive side of the ball this year, and I do think that's maybe possible. But again, just should be getting more than borderline top 25 love. I think they should be firmly in there. Okay, same region of the country. Nebraska got 16 points and was in the others receiving votes category, which
They also signed Pat Mahomes, so that's huge for them.
yeah, Pat Mahomes is playing quarterback this year for Nebraska. In case you haven't heard, Dylan Raiola, Pat Mahomes, same person as far as I'm concerned. I don't need to see anything from him other than his high school tape. He looks like him. He walks like him. I think he gets the same haircut as Pat Mahomes. Checks all the boxes necessary for me. Let's just put him in the Hall of Fame right now. But I actually think that's more egregious than Colorado getting one single vote. I do. And here's why. We're talking about a 5-win team that has 0 bowl appearances in the last 7 seasons, 0 AP top 25 victories in the last 7 seasons. Matt Rule, solid coach.
Mm-hmm.
Not a coach that should have blind faith with something like this. And again, they have Pat Mahomes at quarterback, which is cool. That's great. Last I checked, that's not the thing that instantly gives you that shot of life. We're talking about him in year 2. We're talking about him in year 3. Okay, that's fine. We're even talking about him in November like that, and he's got a little bit of experience. That's fine. But no, I'm not exactly banking on Nebraska being worthy of that to start off the season. And if you tell me, well, they're going to be much better offensively, I will very quickly remind you that they have Marcus Satterfield as their offensive coordinator. And that man has not exactly put together competent offenses in recent memory. Only one season as an FBS offensive coordinator with a top 50 offense, and it was 2022 South Carolina, which greatly benefited from the fact that it had 6 non-offensive touchdowns that year, and it was actually 77th in FBS in yards per
we
play.
watched a good year for him.
Yeah, that's what got him the Nebraska job. So
okay,
remember.
Cool. Good luck with that. All right. Sorry,
yes.
I just
anytime you tell me like, oh, this is just destined to be so much better, Marcus Satterfield. Sustained, Your Honor.
All right. Yeah, no, I'm fully with you. I think that like it's funny, like we've talked about, like you talking about Nebraska because you just know so much about Nebraska because you covered it, and the way that you've kind of dialed into like where they struggle. It's like, yeah, wait till November. Yeah, if you wait till November, buddy, Nebraska's they're cooked. That's the thing about Nebraska. They're only going to be helpful for a couple of weeks. So yeah, I mean they were like winless inside of the continental U.S. one time. So yeah, I think they just it's one of those things where I think that Rule is trying to build a culture kind of like what Billy Napier did when he first got there, which is kind of lowering expectations and not having people talk a bunch of crap online. So I would probably think that he would not want them ranked either, just kind of like sneak up on people and kind of build that culture because things are just so broken there. But I do think I like him a lot. I don't think this is the year.
I do too.
I don't think it's the year, but I think this would be a good year for them to sneak up on some people, and starting them off ranked that high is probably not a good way to do that.
Yeah, Matt Rule went on McAfee, and McAfee's like, how do you feel about not being ranked to start off the year? He's like, I love it.
Right.
And I'm like sitting here dry heaving, like, buddy, if we're ranking you, we're ranking everyone. That's the way this works. When you're 5-7, who do you think deserves to be ranked? Like, what? How do you think this whole thing works? But anyway, I do like Matt Rule, so I don't necessarily say that as like oh my God, they're destined to fail forever. But yeah, just in terms of the preseason poll, earn it. Actually, beat someone that actually like could stay on the field playing in a competitive football before we have that conversation. Mm-hmm. Okay, a team that gets everybody riled up in the preseason, and I'm not too riled up about it, but A&M at 20 is too rich for my blood. I did not have A&M starting off in the top 25. I didn't. I love Connor Wigman. I love the defensive line. And as you know, as anyone that's been listening to this show since like 2018 knows, I love Mike Elko. I love all of these things. I love Colin Klein too. Those things can all be true. And still, we have to acknowledge the history, the recent history, which is not entirely Elko's fault. In fact, very little of it can you actually hang over Elko, only a very small part of it. But this is a program that's trying to get to 9 wins for the first time since 2020. That's a thing. A&M has 11 consecutive true road game losses. Will, their last true road game victory was October 16th, 2021 at Mizzou. Can you name the starting quarterbacks who played in that game? Texas A&M at Mizzou, October 16th, 2021.
Oh my gosh, this would have been like pre-Brady Cook, would it not?
Correct.
Oh no, so it would have been between him and Locke, which
no. Oh yeah.
Between the era, there was like a 2 or 3 year. Oh goodness, man. I don't know that one. And then in 2021, gosh, and then what's it called? Our boy from IMG left in 20, so I actually don't know either of these.
Zach Calzada for A&M.
Mm-hmm.
Auburn legend, who could forget?
Of course.
And former guest of this show, who spells his name correctly, Connor Bazelak.
The other Connor. Yep.
Yeah, just a couple of Connors who ended up in Indiana. It's been a long time, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. That they just won a true road game. Okay, that's significant. A&M, by the way, that day, 283 rushing yards against the Steve Wilkes Mizzou defense. I had to go back and look at that box score. It was, yeah, it was what you would think of that Mizzou team in 2021. But anyway, too many questions on that offensive line for A&M. I'm not sold on the backfield yet, especially after the unfortunate season-ending injury to Reuben Owens. And I have questions about this pass catcher room that lost Evan Stewart. I like Jabre Barber coming from Troy. I thought about like him as like one of those guys that, is he like a dark horse to lead the SEC in receiving? He's still working his way back from an injury that he suffered in spring that was a little bit more serious. So kind of put that as TBD, but they need him to kind of be a thing in that room this year. And I don't know that you can bank on that just yet. But I think a part of why A&M is starting off in the top 25. As much as everybody's going to say it's just because they have all this money, it's because they have a million fans that show up to their game, and we just love overrating A&M. Yeah, that's probably part of it. I think the other part of it is actually Elko's year one at Duke. I do. And I think there feels like a little bit more justified blind faith in that than the typical A&M preseason rhetoric where we're like, we're just getting ahead of our skis. I actually think having a coach that did the things that he did at a program that very much was a rebuilding job year one probably was factored into at least some of the rationale for this ranking. Too rich for my blood to be, number 20th in the country. I would have liked them to be in the others receiving votes category, beat a team like Notre Dame, obviously, then that takes care of it. But I just didn't like A&M being ranked ahead of more proven teams like Arizona, like Kansas, for different reasons why they're not getting the benefit of the doubt.
I really respect your level of credit you're giving these AP voters that they remember his first year at Duke.
They do.
I'm not even going to be honest with you and tell you I exactly remember how many wins he had his first year at Duke. I think they just ran out of names. I think, given hell, if we look up and down the rest of this. But yeah, see, this goes kind of to where you do a ton of research, and I think you assume other people do the same research you do.
Might be right.
I think, because I don't think they're thinking about that. But yeah, I you know what's so interesting about this team? It's that they are going to be like, and this is just my very humble, let me just be honest with you. I was like, I'm going to try to play a game with like every SEC team in NCAA. And the thing that stuck out to me with A&M is they don't really have a ton of speed. Like there's not an exciting athlete on this team, which is crazy when you think about the exciting athletes that have come through there on both sides of the field. Obviously, there have been defensive playmakers. There have been offensive guys. So many guys we can think about A&M. Christian Kirk, how do we get this guy the ball? How do we, this guy is just a force in space. Feels like they don't really have that guy. So it's kind of an interesting, quote unquote, rebuilding team that feels like the offensive line is going to be pretty good. Feels like the defense line is going to be pretty good, which are like the two things that are the hardest to build. But there's just not a guy that I'm really I'm scared of this guy, South Carolina's got Nick Harper, you know what I'm saying, in terms of guys I'm scared of. Not to just do that. Mizzou has Burden. You can go up and down and go, there's 50 people to be scared of in the SEC, and I just don't feel like A&M has one after having only those guys, it feels, are having everything and it not working. So I'm really fascinated because I think the way that they're built is going to prevent them from embarrassing, puking on their shoes type of losses. But I think when it comes to getting up and down the field with good teams, I just don't know if they have the horses for it. So I think they probably will settle out about here, but it's kind of weird to expect that from them now.
Yeah, and by the way, I think A&M steps onto the field with Notre Dame and plays a true 4-quarter game with the Irish in the Open.
Right.
So I'm not saying that Notre Dame, a team that I think I had them at 7 in my preseason rankings, which again, you get into some of the stuff, it's a 10-win team. If you love the transfer edition of Riley Leonard, you're going to be high on them. It's a year 3 Marcus Freeman defense. You can get into all these different things of why you rank teams as high as you do. But to say that A&M is going to just struggle and get blown out by teams like that, I don't think that'll be the case. I think that they can actually hang with them, despite the fact that they may not have those dudes just yet that you look at and say, that guy's scary, that guy's scary. But I do think that the Elko factor, I would like to think that was part of this AP poll vote, but you're right. Maybe it just wasn't. They're just A&M's rich. They got a bunch coming back, probably talent wise, and probably paid a bunch of guys in the portal, which they did well in the portal. Let's not get it twisted, but still, I would still think that they're getting a little bit too much love.
And it is one of those things too, where their offense might all kind of be one amoeba. They could run some of that similar stuff to what Klein ran as a quarterback or what he ran at Kansas State, which is their chunk plays are 5 and 6 yards, kind of like we talked about with Utah. It's 5 and 6 yards, but they're getting it every other play. It might be one of those where it's not exactly one guy and it's just the whole offense is like one of the things from Stranger Things with a bunch of arms. Maybe that's the case. I'm not trying to disrespect any of their players. They have some talent. I'm very interested to see who's going to be the game breaker.
Oklahoma at 16 feels like voters peeked into the schedule a little bit too much. And I don't think that there are 15 teams in the country that you would line up and say they're better than Oklahoma. I just don't. I've been on that train this entire offseason. I had the Sooners at 12, so just outside of that top 10. If we thought that Oklahoma had a schedule like LSU's, which I think LSU's schedule was pretty middle of the pack. Correct me if I'm wrong there. That's
about right.
Yeah. It hasn't been one of the most difficult that we've discussed. It hasn't been one of the easiest that we've discussed with like Ole Miss and Texas and Mizzou. But if it had just a middle of the pack schedule, I don't think there's any way that Oklahoma is only number 16. I think they would be ranked higher. I don't really know that there's an indication that Clemson is better than Oklahoma, like what the AP poll would suggest. Clemson coming in at 14, Oklahoma coming in at 16. I'd love to get Brent Venables' unfiltered thoughts on that. You'd be a great person. A little bit biased.
Hey, buddy, it was me. I don't know if you think that was the reason why that you guys should be, because they were another huge riser without playing a game. I was going to bring them up. It's like, what have you seen from them that makes you think that? Anyway.
Yeah, like Oklahoma was the team that saw its weaknesses, went into the portal, got guys like Deion Burks, who's going to take that Drake Stoops role. You get a tight end in Bauer Sharp, who, I know that is a weird thing to say. Take the Drake Stoops role. Was a valuable player for what
he was a valuable player. That's actually a good point. Yeah.
And like said, okay, defensive line. We know that's an area that we got to be able to get some of these dudes up front. The Dominic Williams thing was well documented. Caden Waller's a guy that comes in that we didn't really talk about as much. Comes in from the Group of 5 level, but somebody that's a bit more proven at the FBS level. And then Clemson got nobody in the portal because.
Again,
like
what did you expect?
Like what truly changed? And I get it. If your receivers are healthier this year, in theory, you should be better. If Garrett Riley gets to run his version of the offense, but still, I look at Clemson and I'm like, I'm just not of this belief that they're a set it and forget it top 15 team anymore. I'm just not. Like going 4-4 in the ACC with as bad as it was last year. To me, that just doesn't really bode particularly well. And look, Clemson lost 5 players on the defensive side of the ball to the NFL draft. We talked about how important that was for a program like Mizzou. Clemson recruits better than Mizzou, so I will give them the benefit of the doubt there. But as you continue to get further and further away from the Brent Venables era at Clemson, I don't really have as much confidence in that group. So, I think Oklahoma is a better team. I had Oklahoma at 12 and Clemson at 20th. So I definitely did not agree with that.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is that I think you're right here about are people looking forward too much to the Oklahoma schedule for their schedule. Well, I would implore people to use that same logic on Clemson, who is traveling to Atlanta, Georgia, to get likely smacked by the #1 Georgia Bulldogs to start the year. You really don't have to look too far into the future to see Clemson's first loss. So if you're going to rank Oklahoma based on where you think they can lose, let me start with Clemson, week 1. So it's pretty fun. I'm not saying either of them is correct. I'm just saying if you're going to do one, I don't know why you wouldn't do the other. And you give it that feels like a little bit of the television, like, oh, well, this is going to be as high of a matchup as possible, which is fine. But it just feels like if Clemson beats Georgia, it's going to change everything we know about college football. Just to be honest, it doesn't feel like that game's gonna be competitive. I'm gonna be honest with you. With the talent Georgia is bringing back and the way that they finished last year, like they're probably gonna treat them like they treated FSU. Anyway,
Georgia's a 2-touchdown favorite neutral site against that Clemson team. So maybe the odds makers disagree on that.
And they're at FSU. Right, which again, who's to say? Like, I say what you will about FSU. Clemson lost to a team that could not kneel to football last year. That was from Florida. So I don't really think we can just assume they're going to lose or they're going to beat FSU and avenge last year when they lost at home. So yeah, this is a decently easy schedule, but it's starting very hard, and it's going to start with a loss. And it's funny that they've kind of set them up to strengthen Georgia's case. Which, if you're a Georgia fan, it's like, hey, thanks again. Where was that last year? But that's ultimately not going to matter in the end because it's week 1. You know?
Yeah. The week 1 rankings. That's why I like to go by end of season stuff and try not always the time of the matchup. I mean, there might be a time and case where time of the matchup makes a little bit more sense, but I am not one that likes to favor that as much. Mm-hmm. Okay, Mizzou at number 11. I don't think that's really disrespectful. I had Mizzou at 9, despite the fact that I feel like I've been pretty adamant that Mizzou will struggle on the defensive side of the ball. I won't repeat myself too much. Mizzou fans have already made it very loud and clear that they're frustrated with my assessment of this team. But starting off at number 11 is perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine when you have as many questions on that side of the ball. It's still the program's highest preseason ranking since 2008, a year in which you had Chase Daniel coming off of the 2017 when they should have played for a national championship but blew it against Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. But like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And if you're looking at this going, well, Mizzou should have been a top 10 team coming into the season, yeah, I would agree with that. But putting them at 11 is by no means egregious, and I don't really know that's all of a sudden bulletin board material for Eli Drinkwitz.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you, and I do you one better too. It's you lose probably the two most impactful coaches on the defensive side of the ball. You lose some leadership on that side of the ball. Fine, okay, that could be a little bit of a work in progress. Also Schrader, right? I mean, that was a guy that was every third down was truly. There were a couple of these wins that were back and forth, and I could just see him putting down his head like one of those dinosaurs with the hard heads and just getting a first down on 3rd and 1. So yeah, I think everyone knows who listens to the podcast. I'm the largest Marcus Carroll stan there is. I would never forget his name or anything. I think he's going to come in and help them out a ton. But that being said, you're losing leadership on both offense and defense, and not to say Brady Cook is not the leader of the team. I think he's a great leader, but I think that when you have a guy who you can physically hand the football to and say, go over there, and he goes, yes, I think it's a big deal in close games that they historically have not done well at, and last year it seemed they figured something out.
Mizzou is coming off of an 11-win season, and they are 18th in the country in percentage of returning production. And one of the things that I like that Bill Connolly does with these rankings is he highlights the teams that finished in the top 20. And of those teams, the teams that finished in the top 20 in terms of percentage of returning production, the only team that's ahead of Mizzou is Oklahoma State, which is kind of crazy. Like, Mizzou is 18th in FBS, but they're second among the teams that finished in that top 20. So like, that's just, I think, a very interesting metric. And if you're trying to say, well, why then would you rank them outside of the top 10? Yeah, fair point. Like, I don't necessarily see pushback on that. I didn't rank them outside of the top 10. I had them at number 9 coming into this season.
Well, the beautiful thing about Mizzou is they can control their own destiny, right? I mean, an 11 ranking is exactly what you want. It's not top 10, right? It's not going to put a bunch of expectations, but it's certainly going to put you in the conversation, especially for a 12-team playoff. So I think that's pretty, if they were at 5, I would be going, oh, if I was a Mizzou fan. I think that's just about perfect.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that at all. I think Florida State at number 10 behind Penn State is slightly disrespectful. I do. I had the Noles at 7, and I'm higher on Florida State than I think the average person, which feels like a massive 180 from where I was at about 4 years ago, where I loved talking about the do something hashtag. Real ones know. Diehard college football fans know what I'm talking about. Certain Martin Luther King doing the chop, But I think Mike Norvell has earned blind faith, and I will take blind Mike Norvell over James Franklin with 20/20 vision. I will. All day.
Literal blind Mike Norvell being stricken down, being led to the field with his hands out. I would take him over.
I would.
James Franklin, who I drafted in the coaching draft because I have no spine. How about that, right? Penn State and Notre Dame hopping Michigan and FSU and Mizzou, who all of which did every single thing they could have, including going undefeated for Michigan, and FSU went undefeated as well until they played Georgia. So you got to be furious going, like I always joke with you, hey, we all remember the Joe Moorhead 2016 game. That was a fun time. Outside of that, there has not really been a time where I felt like Penn State had the ability to really be in these conversations. They want you to think that, the Big Ten media, but starting them above Michigan is so funny because it's like, well, they started the year above Michigan, where Michigan came from behind to beat them. And it's like, okay, man, did you see last year they didn't need to throw the ball?
And here's the thing. If you're going to make the case, well, Penn State, look at what they return. Look at what Michigan returns. Michigan's bottom 5 in the country in percentage of returning production. What about the fact that Michigan went into Happy Valley with Jim Harbaugh down the road, suspended, and who was the coach that day? Oh, yeah, it was Sharon Moore. That's right. The guy who has the Michigan job. Yep. And he already beat James Franklin and did it by shoving it down their throat and just saying, I'm going to run the football. I'm going to run the football. I don't care if you know exactly what we're going to do. I am still going to beat you. And they did that. If I'm a Michigan fan, I know I like to poke fun at Michigan fans, and their desire to always wear two pieces of flair in public. That is 100% true. Literally everywhere I go and I see someone that is wearing that
Hmm.
is wearing Michigan gear, there is another piece of Michigan gear that is on them somewhere. It can be in the middle of February and they're still like, yep, gotta rep it. That's what they do. But Michigan being ranked behind Penn State is that's a tough pill to swallow. If I'm a Michigan fan, I am really, really upset. This is the first time in the last I don't know, ever that I think Michigan actually deserves to feel a bit jaded by anyone or anything.
Yeah, and I think too, man, it's like I get it, man, Harbaugh's gone. Da, da, da. Again, we have just proclaimed we like Manny Diaz and think he is a good coach. We're just gonna pretend like him leaving doesn't matter. Suddenly, Manny Diaz brings this dog to a James Franklin team for the first time since I don't even think the 2016 team had a ton of dog in them. They were just a fun offensive team. Maybe since like
They dog.
Vandy.
They dog.
Yeah, but that was a fun. I mean, they had Saquon Barkley.
Hey, Chris Godwin, Trace McSorley has that
Jason
dog.
Shirley was awesome. I'm just
Yes.
saying they didn't need to like win every inch. That dude was throwing people sideways.
Fair.
So like that's all I'm saying. That was a win every inch team last year. That really Chop Robinson, Manny Diaz, like replacing those guys is just as important. Given we know who James Franklin is, we know Sherrod Moore is a guy who has beaten Penn State. We don't know. We know who James Franklin is. That's all I gotta say on that.
Yeah, the replacement of Tom Allen as the DC is fascinating. And I like Tom Allen obviously as an Indiana guy, but
Mm-hmm.
that will be really interesting to see how both of those guys handle the egos in the room. Very interested to see how that plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Will, could you make the same argument though for Ole Miss and Bama about look, you have to factor in the head to head. Why is one team ranked ahead of the other if that's the case? Because I don't necessarily have a problem with Bama at 5 and Ole Miss at 6. That's the way that it played out. Maybe some voters did indeed look at that and say, you know what, I get it. It's no longer Nick Saban, but still, Ole Miss hasn't gotten over the Bama hump since Lane has been there. Let's give Bama the benefit of the doubt, put Bama slightly ahead. I had them flipped in my preseason rankings. I actually had Ole Miss at 5 and Bama at 6. Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I think that those teams have a definitive result like every single time that they play where Ole Miss would absolutely beat Bama 10 times out of 10 or anything like that. It's like, nah, Ole Miss, maybe they'd win 6 times out of 10, something like that. Maybe it's a true split. Maybe it's 5 and
Mm-hmm.
5. I had them finishing, take that for what it is. Finishing is different than an AP poll for the preseason. I had Ole Miss finishing at number 9 and Bama finishing at number 8. So I actually had Bama finishing ahead of them, even though I both have them getting to 10 wins. But I do think that if you are going to make that case that Ole Miss deserves to be ranked ahead of Bama, despite the fact that we haven't seen that head-to-head that has benefited Ole Miss, you would point to the fact that Bama was exposed to the 30-day portal and Ole Miss was the team that took advantage of the portal as a whole. And beyond whatever sort of Nick Saban boogeyman thing that lingered with Lane Kiffin last year, you can look at the fact that Ole Miss at least controlled some of that game and maybe factor that in. I don't know, but I just love
Mm-hmm.
the portal additions a lot and think that Ole Miss returns a really, really good team, as does Bama. And I've got both of them making the playoff anyways.
Yeah, I know I've been talking to nauseam about, since the last time we saw them, but I will say that the teams that have not moved at all are all hilarious on this list. Alabama being one of them because they truly could not have changed more. Like I just objectively, last time we saw them, they were failing to snap the ball as they gasped the ball backwards and just ran into a Michigan front that was functionally laughing at them on the last play. Now we have this like offensive, like I'm serious, like offensive mastermind in DeBoer, who I say again, he's been that. Like he's an offensive, like if you saw the Tommy Rees offense, delete that from your brain. I think we could all stand to do that, but it's just they've completely changed. They couldn't snap the football. Now they got to have like a first team All SEC center. I mean, everything is different, and yet we're still like, oh, we don't know what to do with them. So yeah, I think these teams are exactly where I hate to say it, they would both like to be, because one thing Lane does not like is rat poison. We've talked about it again ad nauseum. Being ahead of Bama, the worst thing that you could be is Ole Miss and be the first Ole Miss team in the last like 20 years. It's like Eli Manning probably to be ahead of Alabama in a preseason poll and then be like, oh, now we got the target on our back. I think now as Lane Kiffin, you can be like, look, guys, we did all this last year. We got a returning quarterback, and yet Alabama changed everything, and they're still ahead of us, and you can kind of use that. So yeah, and I think from Bama fan standpoint, they're like, hey, this talent's still here. Like at the end of the day, like say what you will, but these recruiting rankings are still here. These guys are still here. So I get the Remo roster maybe was not optimized last year by guys like that. But point being, I'm just very interested by this matchup because it's two separate things, right? It's like we've talked about. The Bullies just graduated. You can't go back and reset that score. But this is kind of a new conversation where it's like, okay, DeBoer is like the young hotshot. He's like a PC, like a sterile version of what Lane Kiffin once was. He's the young offensive mind who was coming to the conference. Oh, this guy had one of the SEC, Paul. So I think these guys are going to be jockeying for position in a situation where we're not seeing guys take these Bama discounts anymore. And it might be a little bit more of a bidding war in the portal between Alabama and Ole Miss, where Ole Miss got everybody they wanted. So I think this is kind of an audition to your offensive players, skill position guys, where it's like, where do you want to play? You want to play for Ole Miss? You want to play for Alabama? Both styles are fun. Like this is it do a lot for the kind of pecking order in the SEC in recruiting.
If you're ranking Bama 8th or ninth or something like that, and if you're saying they don't belong in the top 5 to start off the season, that means that the teams that you're ranking ahead of Bama are teams like Notre Dame and Penn State, and then a Michigan team that, again, has even more turnover than Bama does. Michigan doesn't return a player of Jalen Monroe's caliber. They just don't. With all due respect to Mason Graham on that defensive line, I'm like, maybe you could make the argument that he's a better player. You could make the argument he's a better player overall, but impacting the game like a quarterback, obviously different. Donovan Edwards not impacting the game quite to the level that Jalen Monroe does. So you start to get into those conversations. You're like, all right, well, then would I rank like Florida State ahead of them? I love Florida State, and I still wouldn't necessarily be willing to do. Well, I'm not going to rank like Tennessee ahead of them all of a sudden. They were 8-4 in the regular season last year. So like you start to get into. I'm not necessarily saying that it means that Bama finishes in that spot, but just in terms of the preseason conversation, once you start to dig into what it looks like after those first 4, because I do feel like that is a consensus top 4, even if you didn't have it exactly like that, but in some order. You're having Georgia, you're putting Oregon in there, Ohio State, and Texas. Like that 4, however you kind of want to mix it up. Obviously more people put Georgia at number 1 than anyone else. But once you kind of get beyond that, you can ask these questions about everybody. You really can. And Bama, in my opinion, deserves to be part of that conversation. If you want to say that Ole Miss deserves to start off better than them because of those moves that they've made in the portal, because Bama being exposed to the 30-day window, no problem with that whatsoever. But don't get crazy. Don't get crazy, because then you really start to put yourself in a stupid position to be like, oh, I'm going to rank Penn State ahead of Bama. Like, for what? Why would you do that to yourself? Don't put yourself in that spot, because even if you're skeptical about Kalen DeBoer working out long term, we taking James Franklin over Kalen DeBoer. We doing that? We're not. At least not here. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. No, I can't even form my words as a hater to say that. Yeah, and I will say this too. Like, yeah, there's a first place vote there for Oregon, but I do think the tier splits after Texas. I think there's like points, however if you want to tell me that. I don't know how points work, but I know that there's 100-point split between Texas and Alabama at 4 and 5, and between Oregon at 3 and Texas at 4. It's only like 20 roundabouts, like a little bit less. So point being, like it's pretty razor thin in that 3-4 margin, and the voters are kind of saying like these are the 4 teams we think are definite contenders. And a fair question of Alabama got a new coaching staff. Ole Miss, you've never done this before. Notre Dame, you keep screwing this up, we're going to keep giving you another chance to be 7. Penn State, you screwed it up even more. You get to be 8. And then, so point being, like, yeah.
That top 4 has almost across the board coordinator continuity as well. Chip Kelly coming in as the OC. That's not necessarily coordinator continuity, but it feels like a potential upgrade, or at least it can be. And I think that probably makes that top 4 feel a bit more stable. With what each of those programs are trying to do. Sark talked about that a lot at Media Days, of why Texas feels different maybe than in years past, and coordinator continuity is certainly a big part of that. I guess, Georgia loses Muschamp, so that's part of it, but at the same time, like, you still have Glenn Schumann, you still have Mike Bobo, you get what I'm saying?
Enough people are screaming, I feel. I don't think his presence will be missed. They one of the good, I think I might have mentioned this, but one of the good quotes from Beck was like talking about Coach Bobo doesn't understand. He's like screaming into the new headset microphones, like kind of your dad talking on speakerphone. He doesn't understand that the microphone's up. So Beck is like taking his helmet off, listening to Bobo scream at him so he doesn't go deaf. That's hilarious. I think they'll be good without Muschamp because they still have Kirby and Schulman, but we'll see. But we'll see.
Yeah, you always love the Schulman. The Showman card.
I fixed it this time, all right?
Yeah, no, you corrected. You're good. We're on the record. All right, let's go talk about Dan. Let's go talk about Glenn Schumann. I almost said Dan Shulman. See, now you got me. You got me all over the place too. Let's talk about some coordinators with our guy Matt Hayes. Great combo with him. on all things coordinators, and an update on his future. Sad to say, an update that he will share. He's going to share more details about that at a later date, but I kind of danced around the issue. So here's Matt. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Matt Hayes. Matt, let's start with the elephant in the room. You are unfortunately leaving us. TBD on the announcements of where exactly you'll be. Let's just say you'll be writing nationally. But tell us about basically why you are leaving me as a teammate and why I'm really upset right now.
I don't know why I'm leaving you as a teammate, actually. I should just drag you along with me, right?
Package deal, man. Like twins coming out of high school, going into college. Let's do it.
Right. I'm just really excited about where I'm headed. We'll know shortly. We'll have a little announcement shortly, but really excited about where I'm headed, what we're doing, and what the future holds. Yeah. Pumped, actually.
I say it all the time, but like in all seriousness, in my 9 years of being with this company, like for those who don't know, Matt is one of the best teammates I've had. And, we've had countless times where C. Wright has reached out to us about breaking news or something like that. And we both are in a position where we have to react, and we usually react differently enough, even if we don't communicate directly, which is kind of a crazy thing that usually doesn't happen like that. We don't really do a whole lot of stepping on toes, which is what I've always liked about you. And you always bring such a unique perspective, which, I love. But just because you got a new gig doesn't mean I'm going to stop bothering you like every other month to be able to come on the show. You know that, right?
Of course. I'd be happy to, man. You know that.
Yeah. Well, Matt's still going to be a fixture, Jacksonville radio as well. That gig, as of right, unless you want to break some news there and tell us that you're quitting your day job to be able to
do the entire radio day from 9 to 5.
Just do it.
I'm kidding, man. No, still doing radio 2 to 4, 1010XL in Jacksonville.
Love it. And they do great work over there as well. So for those that want to hear Matt's voice all the time, that's the place to be able to catch him. Okay, let's talk some coordinators, Matt, because we just got the top 25 week is over, which for both of us that do this, it is a lot to be able to come up with these rankings, all the different things that we come up with for not just teams, but of course, getting into you ranked coaches, you ranked coordinators. But I think the coordinator element is a little bit more interesting and not something that we maybe talked about quite as much. Top 25 OCs, top 25 DCs in college football. If you want to see the full list, SaturdayDownSouth.com. Spoiler alert, long-time Iowa defensive coordinator Phil Parker, he is number one. He edged out Glenn Schumann for that number one spot. How close was Schumann to being number one on that list? Because I think if you were just making the argument, I want to start a team and pick any coordinator in college football to be my DC, I think Schumann would probably be number one.
I think if you're just talking just strictly X's and O's, I think I might take Phil Parker, honestly. I mean, I'm not. Look, I don't want to downgrade what Glenn Schumann's done or what that entire staff has done over the last 4, 5, 6 years on defense, and he's been a part of that. I just think you look at what the personnel that Iowa has compared to the personnel that Georgia has, and the way Iowa plays defense, and the way they're so fundamental, and they're so smart, they take great angles, they don't get beat. It's impressive the way they play the game, and then you add in on top of that the fact that they were playing offensive football last year with a fullback at quarterback who completed 40-some% of his passes, and the ball couldn't go down the field. I mean, how do you not just stand there in awe of what Iowa did? I mean, they were averaging like two point something yards per play last year on offense. That's ridiculous. And they still were in top 5 defense. They still were the reason Iowa won 10 games. I'm going to say this again. They had a fullback paying quarterback, and they won 10 games in the Big Ten. I don't know what else you got to say after that. Okay, there he is, number one with a bullet.
That's fair, and it's an accomplishment that Glenn Schumann could be at Georgia for 200 years and never probably have an offense that's quite like that, where his defense has to be on the field that much. I think what Georgia fans are wondering is not whether or not Glenn Schumann's going to be at Georgia as long as Phil Parker is at Iowa. That just seems unrealistic for someone that's 34 and is all over everybody's radar to be able to get one of these head coaching jobs. But the note that you had about Schumann, it feels like he's going to be holding out for the perfect opportunity to become a head coach, just like Kirby did, staying at Alabama until Georgia came along, just like Lanning did, staying at Georgia until Oregon came along. What could that perfect job be for Schumann?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think it's going to have to be a big job. I mean, could it be something like Florida? Of course it could. I mean, there are any number of jobs out there. I mean, we say like maybe South Carolina. I don't know where Shane is right now. Shane needs to win some games. There's no doubt about that. It's just like Billy Napier does. Would he go to South Carolina? I don't know. I don't know. Billy Napier turned down South Carolina. He didn't want that job. So there are reasons you go for some and not the others. But I expect he will be a high commodity. I expect he will take a big job at some point in the relative near future, maybe even after this season, after Georgia wins it all again, and the defense once again plays lights out. I would. He's going to be high commodity, much like Dan Lanning was when Dan went to Oregon.
Can I throw a few at you? We got to play some sort of hypothetical game. That's what we always do. Okay, so you mentioned Florida. I'll take that off the list. North Carolina, is that good enough for Glenn Schumann?
I like what North Carolina has. I also think North Carolina will eventually be in the SEC. So I think if you're looking at it down the road, it's a really good job. I don't know how quickly Mac's going to leave. Mac may have a little resurgence. They may win 10 games. He's not going anywhere. They win 10 games, they got a chance to be in the playoff. The playoff now, Connor, has expanded everything. It's not only expanded the ability for teams to get in and compete for the national championship, it's expanded the lives of coaches, too, of some coaches. Now, other people will look at the other side of it and say, no, now the bar's the playoff, and if you don't get in, you're out.
Exactly.
But that's the negative way of looking at it, man. If you're a coach and you look at that thing, the positive way is there are now 12 spots for this thing. So if you can figure out how to navigate your schedule and get 10 wins out of your schedule, which a lot of guys have done of late, and then their teams have kind of filtered away over the next couple of years. But if you do that and you get to those 10 wins and you get to the playoff, you're going to get an extension. You're going to get some nice cash out of it.
And Mac would clap back if that happened. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, yeah.
Especially
I still think
post-Drake Mac.
Mac's not ready to go, man. There's no way. Mac is not ready to go.
Okay, how about one that's a little bit more popular, a little bit more well-documented, the coach's job security? What about Arkansas? Is that good enough for Glenn Schumann?
Ooh, I love Arkansas. I do, man. I love that town. I love the fan base there. There's a lot of money there. The facilities are fantastic. I think you can win there. It's just going to take the right guy. You and I both thought DeSam was the right guy, and he may be. Who knows? He may pull it out. But if it's not, it's not. And I think he's very grateful for what he had and the time he got and the ability and the offer he got and the chance he got. I like that place, man. I do. I think that would be tempting. If I were him, that would be very tempting for me. And I know it's difficult because it's an SEC job and it doesn't, quote unquote, have the resources of the other jobs. But I don't know if I would believe that. There's a lot of money in Arkansas, the state of Arkansas. A lot.
Yeah, people know about the chicken money. It's very much there.
Well, it's rentals. There's all kind of stuff there, man. There's a lot. Walmart. If you get the right coach and the right coach who can get everybody aligned and on board, their NIL money will skyrocket.
Okay, here's an intriguing one because not on the hot seat, but I've gone on record saying I think this is going to be his last season there. If Mark Stoops steps down in Kentucky, if he just gets kind of fed up with what college athletics has become in his specific role, and there's a vacancy there, and let's just say, hypothetically speaking, John Summerall, the guy that everybody and their mother is kind of projecting as the coach in waiting at Kentucky. Let's just say he's like, you know what, timing's not right. Kind of want to stick it out at Tulane. Really like what I'm doing here. Maybe if the opportunity comes along later, I would listen to that. But let's just say, in theory, that was a vacancy, and they put on the full court press to be able to get a Glenn Schumann. Would that fit make sense?
I don't know. You know what? I don't know why you've been throwing Stoopsy in there. It's odd that you're doing that because that's kind of your program.
Whoa.
Those are kind of your boys. You like those guys.
They've been. I've talked. They've been very good to me. So I think it should. I'm just saying. I think it should be. It should come with a little bit more of a If I'm coming out and suggesting this.
Okay, so here, let me just say this. I don't think Stoops is going anywhere. I don't think he's walking away. I think if he's going somewhere, it's to Iowa to take that job. Because that's just, it's his alma mater. They're going to throw all kind of money at him if Kirk Ferentz leaves. That will be intriguing for him. I don't think there's any question about that. So let's just say in your what if scenario that happens. Is that a job that Glenn Schumann would take? What's the difference between Kentucky and South Carolina? If you're strictly looking at it. And I'm not trying to demean either job. I'm not, okay? I'm just saying, what's the difference between those jobs? If you're Glenn Schumann and you're an elite assistant and the last elite assistant got the Oregon job, I mean, are you going to take Kentucky or South Carolina, or are you going to wait for something bigger to open up?
Just depends. Kentucky's paying a football coach $9 million right now. I mean,
no, I know that. I totally get all of that. But it's also about the ability to win and the ability to win enough to where if you want to get that next elite job, you can jump. And look, Kirby waited and waited and waited for his job to open, and he got it. And Dan Lanning waited and waited and waited for his job to open, and he got it. So if I'm Glenn Schumann, and I'm sure he's being told this by Kirby, it's you got to be selective, man. Don't just jump at the first thing.
The job that I don't think is going to come open, even if that week one result doesn't go their way, but you know how these conversations work. You probably know how your boy Leon Searcy's going to be talking about this as well. What about Miami? Would Miami be good enough for Glenn Schumann?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think Miami will at some point be in one of the two big conferences too. Also, it's Miami. It's the recruiting footprint. It's everything is there and available and waiting to win. They got the mega booster John Ruiz, who allegedly is going to build a stadium for them close to campus. It's Miami's a great job. By the way, you're now starting getting a little bit more on my side about this. We talked about this 4 months ago, and I said that Florida-Miami game will be the biggest game of that first weekend. And by the time it rolls around, everybody's going to be saying, oh, my God, this game is like literally like win or lose, live or die for each one of these coaches. And that's kind of what it looks like right now.
It's good, though. I think we need some of that in college football as everybody's talking about how the 12-team playoff is going to diminish these games with massive stakes and stuff. And even the Michigan-Ohio State game, it's like, all right, well, if Ryan Day loses that but still wins a national championship, it's not really do or die if you're looking at it from that standpoint. To have something like that, I'm not necessarily going to be of the belief that it is quite make or break for both of those coaches, but it's going to dominate conversation. It's going to be kind of hard for either one of them to shake that off because it is that marquee game early on the schedule for both of them, especially for Miami with how favorable it looks like it sets up this year. That game is going to be huge.
I think Mario could withstand it because it's on the road and because the schedule is so favorable. Like they could go 10-2, then win the ACC championship game and get in the playoff, and he can withstand that. The reason why I shouldn't say I don't think Billy can withstand it. I think it's going to be difficult for Billy Napier and that program to withstand it is you've got 9 months of feeling really good about where you're headed. They're talking about we're going to shock the world and people don't know how, what it's like here in this locker room. We know what it's like. We know where we're headed. And, we feel great about this team and everything is great, right? You feel really good about yourself. And you get in that game, you lose 26-9 and it looks the same and it's still an operational mess and it's going to go south quickly.
Okay, let's talk about another 34-year-old defensive coordinator. I'm really intrigued by Danton Lynn, and he's somebody I've talked about throughout the offseason. Lincoln Riley hires him from UCLA after he really overhauled that unit. And if you weren't paying attention and you were just kind of focused on the Chip Kelly saga, whatever that was, you might have missed out on the fact that UCLA turned into one of the best defenses in all of college football. I'm really interested in what his next step looks like because you had him at 7 on this list. And if he turns around the USC defense, the much scrutinized USC defense in a post-Alex Grinch world, he's either going to be top 4 on that list of defense coordinators next year, or he's going to be off the list altogether because he's got a head coaching gig. One and done. He doesn't really have the geographical ties though, because he grew up in Texas. He's a Penn State grad. And even though he's spent that time on the West Coast, where would you think he could end up? Could he be an SEC candidate to watch if we have 3 or 4 vacancies in the SEC?
Well, you know how crazy the coaching carousel is in college football and how hot. You can be hot one year. Let's just say 1 year USC is a top 20 defense and they're 11-1 and they get in the playoff and it's crazy and look at USC, they're back and however they lose in the playoff. Yeah, I mean, absolutely I could see him getting a major job because he's the reason. He then becomes the reason they're there. He then becomes, because all I got to do is look at Lincoln Riley's track record of defenses, both at Oklahoma and at USC. It's very clear what's going on. So then you say, yeah, this guy clearly knows how to coach, right? He clearly knows how to organize. So he becomes a high priority candidate, I would think. And yeah, I would think, of course, in the SEC, and I would think in the Big Ten as well. Yeah. Because look, let's be honest about this too, Connor. Is there are levels now of the game, and there are levels for players to play at. There are levels for coaches to coach at. If you're a coach, you want to coach at one of those two big conferences, the SEC or the Big Ten. If you're a player, you're a high school player, you want to get a scholarship offer from one of those two big conferences. Or if you're in the portal, you want to go to one of those two big conferences. You want to play where the mega games are, where the 8 o'clock games are, where the big ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, all those games are. Look, these guys are all about their brands now, the players. So they want to push themselves as much as anything. So, yeah, I think if you're talking about DeAnthony Lynn and what he could do, how he could take a one-year wonder, let's just call it a one-year wonder, but it's not a one-year wonder, a one-year huge turnaround at USC and what he could do with it. Could he parlay that into a big SEC job? Hell yes, he could. Yeah. Especially in this crazy age of player and coach movement.
D'Anton Lynn and Pete Golding are probably the coordinators, at least on the defensive side of the ball, that have maybe the most pressure on them, albeit for kind of different reasons, but somewhat similar. It just feels like both will have so many eyeballs on them. And you had Pete Golding at 12 on this list. This is probably higher than what an Alabama fan might have assumed, but
Right.
what he did at Alabama was, not nothing. It just wasn't at the level that Alabama fans had become accustomed to know. And obviously, so much of his, like his stock will be determined by this year, handling all that talent at Ole Miss, very well documented. But it feels like he has the widest range of outcomes. Like if they have a bad year and it's just exasperated lane, defense letting up points left and right, doesn't all come together, he could get fired and spend a year as an analyst somewhere. Or there's a world in which he's a Broyles Award finalist and he gets his first head coaching opportunity at the group.
Next South Carolina coach.
Maybe is it kind of crazy to think about? Like, if you had to look into the crystal ball, like, how do you think this year plays out for Pete Golding?
By the way, sorry, Shane. I feel like I keep burying Shane. Shane's good dude, man. I'm not trying to bury him.
Shane's not going to like that. He's not.
No, he knows it, man. He knows he's got to win. Yeah. Can I see that happening? Of course. I guess it happen both ways. But they're better on the lines of scrimmage now than they've ever been. Even Nick Saban was talking about that at SEC Media Days. And Lane has talked about that. So, can they be in a situation where they get off the field on third down? It's all about getting off the field for them right now. They can't get off the field. That's what their biggest problem is when they're in big games. They just get worn down. Can't get off the field, get worn down, and then all of a sudden on offense, you almost have to be perfect. And, how many teams are almost perfect on offense? So that's what's difficult. I think there could be a situation where we could see that. I could also see a situation, Connor, where they go 11-1 and their offense is just crazy good, and they get to the semifinals, and they lose the semifinal 45-41, and Charlie Weiss Jr. is the head coach somewhere next year. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. He may lose both coordinators.
Let's talk about that guy because he's at number 5 on your list of offensive coordinators in college football. A lot of people don't realize that technically Charlie Weiss Jr. has primary play calling duties. Lane takes more of the CEO approach. Obviously, he still has his hands in the mix of the offense, but it is technically Charlie Weiss Jr.'s to run. That is what Lane has been saying ever since he hired him, ever since he had to replace Jeff Lebby. Tell me why you're so high on the 31-year-old offensive coordinator.
2 things. Well, actually 3 things. Organization, recruiting, and play calling. He's the most organized guy in a long time for that age, how old he is. One of the most organized coaches in all of college football, for that matter. It's funny. So this is even crazy for me to say this, but I'm going to tell you this great anecdote. I was talking to Gil Brandt about him. Okay. Gil Brandt, God rest his soul. This was probably 6 years ago when Charlie Jr. was 26, I think 25 maybe.
At FAU. Yeah.
25. Yeah. He said, I sat down and talked with him. And there's 2 guys that I've talked to that I felt got it, understood football as well as anybody or better than anybody. One of them was Bill Belichick. The other one was Charlie Weiss Jr. Right. But, and understand this too, is he's in demand by NFL teams. Like there are NFL teams that wanted him this offseason, wanted him to be their OC. So he's making a lot of money at Ole Miss. He's happy there. His family's happy there. And I think he's playing it smart. I think he's thinking, you know what? I like the college atmosphere. I like the college game. I'll see how it plays out. If I'm a college head coach, that's great. If that leads to something bigger in the NFL, that's great too. But he's on a fast track to be a head coach very soon.
Autonomy.
He's a phenomenal recruiter too, by the way, which is what all ADs and presidents will love.
Yeah, he is intriguing and probably somebody that needs to be more on my radar with those conversations, and putting him as, when I come up with these lists of candidates and stuff like that, he's definitely a name to keep in mind. Different point of his career, but Robert Patrick Petrino, aka Bobby, you call him Bob, which I was like, oh, we're getting.
Everybody calls him Bob. Everyone calls him Bob.
Not me. I call him Robert Patrick.
Bobby are people in the media. Everyone else calls him Bob.
It's so much better. He doesn't.
I think Sam calls him Bobby because Sam's just a good old boy. My Bobby, one of those things. Everyone else calls him Bob. That's his name, Bob.
He's a good. If there is a Bob in college football, it's got to be him, right?
Like, think about this. Everybody called Stoopsy Bob except for Spurrier. Called him Bobby. All right, Bobby. Bob. His name is Bob Stoops. It's the same thing with Bob Petrai. Whatever. We're getting way too. Now I'm starting to say Bob so much it doesn't sound like a word anymore. You know how that goes?
It's a verb, actually. People forget
Right.
that. It is. He's in a fascinating situation at Arkansas because the handpicking of Taylon Green, it's coming into a situation that, for all the things that we can talk about with the reunion with Arkansas, if we're just talking about it from a football standpoint.
Right.
It's how is this guy who has been one of the best offensive minds in college football of the 21st century, probably. How is this guy still doing it in the year 2024? And what does it look like now that we're really not questioning the amount of control he's going to have? Like, it's, you can dig into how much he had at A&M, what was there for him, what was not there for him. Total autonomy is his now in Fayetteville. You had him at 3 on your list. So that means you're projecting huge things for this Arkansas offense this year, I would assume.
No, it doesn't mean that I'm projecting huge things, okay? What it means is the guy knows offense. That's what it means. And he's an unreal play caller. So you asking me, why does he keep getting jobs? He keeps getting jobs despite some issues in the past off the field, because he's a brilliant offensive mind. And the game is now a vertical game. And it's all about the quarterback, and it's all about pushing the ball vertically. And he is tremendous at that. So my guess is he'll continue to get great jobs. Let's say Arkansas goes 5-7 and that whole staff gets blown up. Bob will find another job somewhere else. Someone else will hire him. There's no doubt about it, they will, because he's too good at what he does.
He would be the most fascinating, and I know I've used the word fascinating a lot, but interim coach ever, maybe, if he were to get that interim job.
All right, so let me say this real quick. If Connor Wigman doesn't get hurt, I think Jimbo's still the coach there, because that offense is going to be really, really good with him.
I agree.
So if it gets to the point where Arkansas starts off, I don't know. I feel so bad doing this to Sammy too, man. He's our boy. They start off like 1-4, 1-5. Yeah,
2-4 to the bye week. 2-4 to the bye week would be bad.
And they blow him out. Yeah, and then Bob would be the interim. Let's say he gets an upset here or there, maybe 2 upsets. Could I see them going, screw it, let's just bring him back? Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
I'm here for those conversations. I'm here for it. I'm not shutting that door. I will not shut that door until absolutely necessary.
Before he went on the ditch in his Harley, by the way, the best part about that entire thing, okay, was when he went to the press conference after, and he's got the neck brace on. And by the way, he's wearing the Sugar Bowl hat. Just to remind everybody, I'm the guy that got you to the Sugar Bowl. Remember that.
That's a really good point, Matt. And
of course it's why he wore it. Yes.
Nobody's looking at his hat.
That's the first thing I did was look at Bob wearing that Sugar Bowl hat, man. That's Connor.
That's the first thing you looked at. You didn't look at the neck brace?
Well, I saw the neck brace, but it's his head. So you're seeing his head, and I see the hat. And the first thing I think, this is like how my mind works. The first thing I think of is, oh my God, that's a great move by him. He's basically telling everybody who's watching this, you may not like the way I act off the field. I may look like a turd, but I'm the guy that got you the Sugar Bowl. Don't ever forget that.
It happened
and
3 months earlier.
I can guarantee you there are fans out there going, he got us to the Sugar Bowl.
If he gets the interim job, which again, we're not rooting for. Hope Sam Pittman has a long future at Arkansas.
Of course not. I feel like this is a Seinfeld episode. Of course not.
But if he does show up, not with the neck brace, but with the Sugar Bowl hat, That will be his loud message to the Arkansas brass, to Hunter Yurachek, to all the chicken people, to the Walmart people, to everybody involved. Hey, buddy, you remember the Sugar Bowl. It was a good time,
Let's put it this way. He's not going to do that, but I will say this. If he does get that job, again, I hate even saying that because I'm not going to bury Sammy. I feel like we're killing Sam and Shane Beaner right now. So if that does happen, then that Sugar Bowl hat or some token of the Sugar Bowl will be in that office for the next 5, 6, 7 weeks. So that every time someone of any consequence comes in to talk to him, they're going to be staring at something Sugar Bowl.
I don't blame him. I do the same thing.
No, I do the same thing, man. Hey, this is what it was like. Remember me?
Oh, gosh. All right, last one for you, Matt. Is USC going to look like a team that actually wants to be in Vegas against LSU? Or as you reported with Lincoln Riley trying to get out of that matchup, is this going to be a USC team that embodies the mindset of its head coach?
Okay, so first part, I don't blame Lincoln for trying to get out of that. I mean, he's in a rebuilding mode right now, so I don't blame him at all. But the fact that he sat there Big Ten Media Days and denied it is laughable. It's absolutely laughable. We've gone over this many times, and it's believe me, he tried to get out of it. He tried to get his agent Trace Armstrong to talk to Brian Kelly, Trace Armstrong was also Brian Kelly's agent, to get out of that game, and it didn't have Brian saying that's not happening. Forget about it. The whole point is, though, I think this is as big or bigger a game for Brian Kelly, and I'll tell you why. I think Brian, who I believe I had a third on my top 25 coaches, is that right? I think it was third I had Brian at.
I think so. I have the coordinators pulled up. I don't have the head coaches. Let me check that.
All right. So I think Brian's a terrific coach. Okay. But I also think Brian now realizes he blew it last year. I think you only get so many chances to win a national championship. He had an offense in this day and age that could win a national title. He just needed to be like on a scale of 1 to 10, a 5.5 on defense. He needed to have the Auburn defense of 2010, and they would have won the national championship. But they couldn't stop anyone. Had they had any semblance of a defense last year, they would have won the whole thing. So now he's starting over, and I like how he's very confident in SEC Media Days, and he's saying this offense could be better than last year. Garrett Nussmeier is not rushing for 1,100 yards, okay? Garrett Nussmeier is not the threat that Jaden Daniels did. It's not going to be better than last year. Unless Garrett Nussmeier becomes the thrower that Joe Burrow was overnight, and he throws for 5,000 yards and 60 touchdowns like Joe Burrow did. Then I would say, okay, then it's better. But that's not going to happen. I think he realizes that he probably missed out on a big, big opportunity to win a national championship last year. And he can't start the season with a loss to USC, a marquee team in a big game, a neutral site game. And this is the new SEC, the new 16-team league. He has to win that game right out of the gate to show not only we're still here, we're still a legit national title contender, and we don't care about Texas and Oklahoma. Bring it on, man. But you lose that game, then all of a sudden it's, uh-oh. You know how we are in the media, Connor. We're prisoners of the moment. So you lose that game, then all of a sudden it's, is LSU part of that future of the SEC now with Texas and Oklahoma? And of course, that'll switch by week 3 or 4, but until then,
Yeah, you can see those Sunday night headlines.
Of course.
They're right.
Yes.
That's the irony. And by the way, you had Brian Kelly at 3. You were correct. The irony is that Brian Kelly is the one that should have looked at the schedule and been like, wait a minute, a Sunday night game? Let me get out of that. Why am I playing another Sunday night game for everybody to just mock me after I potentially lose? This is a terrible idea. He's the one that probably should have been getting out ahead of it. I realize we'll play anybody, anywhere, anytime.
He loves those games. He's like Nick, same thing. He loves those games. Like the FSU game on Labor Day night. What was that, like 3 or 4 years ago? When they won on the 2-point conversion.
Oh, the Mackenzie Milton one when he was at Notre Dame. Yeah, because I was going to say, like we've had, last year, obviously that game on that game being played on a Sunday night was, made for everyone to just lock in on how bad LSU's defense was, and it was something that hung over him the entire season.
Horrendous, and quite frankly, it hasn't been good the last couple of years. It was better. It was better in 22 because in 23 just. Wow. Just not good in any way, shape, or form.
Number 3 defensive coordinator in college football, according to Matt Hayes, a certain Blake Baker, should be in position to turn that around, one would think. But again, wait till that Sunday night in Vegas, and then we'll come up with sweeping generalizations and all the takes about LSU this year. That's the way it works. Matt,
It works, man.
you're the best. Success and nothing less at your future national job covering college football across the country.
All right, brother. Thanks, Connor.
Will, lad of the week, I'm going to guess that we're both going to go with Olympics. Probably. And we might just cover pretty much everything here. I could narrow it down to just one lad of the week. So I went with the entire USA track team, which I feel like is very worthy of this, because I'll admit I came into the Olympics not really being all in as a track spectator. It's just never really been one of my favorite sports to watch. And I covered 3 state track events in Nebraska. High school state track in Nebraska is a huge, huge deal. Like it is a bigger deal than the state championship in high school football. Like I kid you not. It is awesome. Like it is like a premier event in the state. If you know, you know. Probably nobody listening to this knows that, but so I've seen my fair share of track and like have watched like awesome competitive races. And it's not to say that there aren't like, fun things to be able to watch for, but like I was blown away watching track. Track, especially the US team, it was must see TV. It really was. It was so good that I could not pick one lad or lass. If I did, lass would have been Sydney McLaughlin Lavroni, who, look, if I had to say that name every single time on the call, I would probably be in trouble. But shout out Kentucky. She would have been the last, and then the lad would have been Rye Benjamin, who was just incredible as well. But McLaughlin is a certified GOAT in every possible way. 6-time world record holder in the 400-meter hurdles. Just, she's insane. Like watching her and the screenshots of how far ahead of the field she would be. I mean, she's just unbelievable. She had just an incredible Olympics and just turned 25. Wonder if she's going to compete in LA. Going to be a popular story for a lot of these athletes. The most iconic image of the entire Olympics, Sha'Carri Richardson looking over at the end of the relay. I mean, like put that on a Wheaties box. That's probably a 20th century approach. That's going to be a meme forever, I think. As far as I'm concerned, that moment was absolutely incredible. I like rewound it, watched it several times back just because it was that good. And then Big Ten legend Rye Benjamin was unreal. Big Ten legend because he went to USC and UCLA. Who could forget? How about Katie Ledecky, the ACC trying to claim Katie Ledecky and then having the context thing on Twitter? Like,
no, wait, come on. No, we're going to see a ton of that, by the way. Yep. Their choreography is going to be so confusing. The math is not going to work.
I think these accounts need to just go for it. Just make it as egregious as possible. Your goal is to get engagement. It's social media. Like, who cares? Get that engagement up. Get people talking about it. Get the quote tweets going. I love all that. But yeah, Rye Benjamin was so fun to watch. He got redemption in the 400 hurdles after he lost in Tokyo. And then I don't know if you saw the end of the 4x4 relay, but the anchor leg to be able to win gold, he was just absolutely insane. He is awesome. He did a feature before the start of the event where it was before the start of the 400 hurdles. And he basically produced an entire 3-minute video for NBC where he's saying this clip should go here and then do a montage of me talking about this. And, go back to Tokyo and now get the clip, which for those of us like Will, we're in the media business. I can't even do that. That is so difficult to put together from a production standpoint to like properly, even if you're putting together a reel on Instagram, this is like way above that pay grade even. So a million bonus points for him for being able to do that. And yeah, I mean, it was just incredible. Now, Quincy Hall, that moment where he looks like he's just dead. And I would have bet the farm on that guy being absolutely cooked. And then down the stretch in the 400, he just comes out of nowhere to win. Man, Cole Hawker, the last shout out Indianapolis, by the way. U.S. distance running as a whole kind of had a moment at the Olympics. Cole Hawker coming back in the 1500 was insane. And we had been traveling all day on Tuesday. And after Claire had finally gone to sleep on the plane, we were watching it like NBC primetime, on the plane, little screen in the back of the seats. And Lauren and I are both like tried to celebrate while not waking up Claire as she's like passed out on Lauren's chest.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was just amazing. How about the fact that like US had two people on the podium in the 1500 for the first time since 1912. Didn't realize that, but yeah, I mean USA track. It was must see TV every day. It was awesome. The Olympics as a whole was awesome. Favorite Olympics of my lifetime, hands down. Was sad to see them end. Then was very, very happy to see Snoop and Dre performing together in LA, being able to turn the page to LA 2028.
Yeah, that was, man, I locked in on this Olympics more than one of the ones I don't know why the Olympics just has not lined up with my viewing habits. It's very interesting. It might just be it's like terrestrial. There's something to it. Maybe I just need to set alarms. I'm not great at that. I have like my stuff I watch, but this time I really did lock into it and was able to see. I mean, love the breakdancing stuff. That was very funny. Yeah, the Australian woman. Goodness, that was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. If you guys haven't looked it up, look up Ray Gunn, the Australian breakdancing. But Snoop signified like tapped that off or whatever, tipped off. So that was cool.
If Snoop had just crip walked, would that have been better than her routine? I think so.
No comment on that. But yes, I think he's been great to be corporate. Like Snoop actually is so it's cool. Like I said, we talked about him as lad of the week earlier. So yeah, to put a close on this and see, this is great because I actually did not have a ton about track and field in here, so this worked out great. There has just been this overall feeling in the Olympics. And I think the Olympics, and this is not, I'm not an expert in this or anything, but it feels like the Olympics is built to crown young athletes and kind of expose them to the world. And it feels like among Team USA, we see a lot of these teams at a crossroads, and we see the American athletes, the old guard was able to come through again and again and again. And you talked about that in track and field. I think some great examples, Simone Biles, the way that she had her like mental health struggles with the twisties or the yips, as it'd be called in other sports, being off the team, for the personal reasons, coming back, being great at that. Ledecky is just unstoppable. Like these names that you've seen, and the question was, could they be dethroned? And the answer was no, pretty much across the board, right? Sure, there were some here and there, right? But when you look at the men's and women's basketball teams, seeing, these great WNBA players, start with the women, right? So the whole thing is, are they going to bring Caitlin Clark and or Angel Reese? Do they need them? Well, they kind of silence all those doubters in a way, right? A little bit closer than they'd probably like, but it all comes down to Asia Wilson, right? It all comes down to this squad of women that have been together for a long time. Diana Taurasi, everybody was, dumping on her for going to the Olympics and I guess taking quote unquote Caitlin Clark's spot. She's a 6-time gold medalist. That's nuts. Starting in 04 in Sydney. I don't even remember those Olympics. So it's crazy what she's done. She wasn't obviously like a massive factor or anything, but that leadership means something. I think people that are just kind of new to women's basketball, and I'm not going to say I'm a long time expert or anything, but the people that were clamoring for the Caitlin Clark stuff didn't really understand what Taurasi meant to the team. And you might have been animosity she couldn't have towards Caitlin Clark too.
She was on the team with Dawn Staley. That's how old Diana Taurasi is at this point, that they were on a team together playing, and Dawn Staley obviously very, very established as a basketball coach, but and was on the call in this. But that was a weird thing to process. Yeah. They should have brought up a picture to be able to show that. Yeah,
I mean it's super cool to watch one player signify the how far women's basketball has come, right? Where Taurasi's the leading scorer of all time in the W, just really cool stuff. And again, I always just want to credit Asia Wilson. If you guys haven't seen her, she's unstoppable. She looks so sick. She has a really smooth game, so check her out. She's kind of the unheralded star. I hate to say that, but hopefully that put people more on bar with her. And then, man, the basketball stuff. I know I talked about, or the men's basketball stuff, right? Like I know it's just called basketball. Here's why I call it that. But the men's side of it, where we're seeing these guys, and like I was able to, I talked about this with Lad of the Week. Like we were both just generational LeBron haters. We make no, bones about that, but seeing him represent America, seeing kind of that ending scene with LeBron, whose beard is noticeably grayer than I've ever seen it, seeing Steph, who's kind of starting to get the age lines on his face and again, still looks great, still crushing all that different stuff, seeing Kevin Durant and seeing him take over Melo's record. We always used to joke about Olympic Melo. Well, it seems that Kevin Durant has also found the Olympics to be this bastion of his career, the way that Melo did, where he could find peace, he could be respected as a peer. And I think, say what you will about Steve Kerr. I know the Celtics fans were mad about Jason Tatum playing. Measuring that dog in you, Anthony Edwards has that.
Yeah.
Not sure that Jason Tatum does. I think it's also really cool to see Devin Booker step up and choose to be a role player the way he was on Kentucky. I think that kind of led to that. But seeing the old guard say, not so fast, young man, and we're still going to stay here. We're still going to get our gold medals. This is going to be our farewell tour. It's not going to be a crowning or a passing of the torch. We're going to go out on our terms. I think we got to see so many Olympians that as we haven't even processed that we saw them play for America for the last time, especially on those big stages when you talk about NBA players and you talk about these team sports that they have other obligations and families, and they've given enough to their sport. And you talk about these, Simone Biles is only 27. It's so crazy. It really just turned 27. It's crazy that we think of her as like this old head, but she's been on the national circuit since 2013. So yeah, just a long rambling way of saying like USA's traditional old school athletes that we all grew up playing got to write us a love letter, give us a farewell tour. And I think it was very cool.
Seeing the events that France was competing for a gold medal and how incredible the crowds were made me that much more excited for 2028. Because everybody, dogs LA. It's like, it's not a good sports town, whatever. I think the Americans will show out to be able to make that a fun atmosphere. And I also had another thought about like the U.S. hosting an Olympics, which it hasn't hosted a Summer Olympics. It's 96 with Atlanta, obviously. Something that I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will remember really, really well. Marler always talks about like the fact that he got to be there and, got to, actually like take in all the scenes, which is so cool. And I'm extremely jealous of, but how the people that are competing in LA in 2028 on the US side probably weren't alive for it. Or if they somehow were, they have no memories whatsoever, which is crazy. I feel like 96 in Atlanta is one of the seminal moments of my childhood, like watching all the different things that happened through that. And like the bombing and all that stuff is like, it's such a, I remember that summer so well. I was like going to a new school right before, or like right after that and stuff. And it made me really excited just for what it's going to be. And I know that it was really cheesy watching Tom Cruise go from Paris to LA, just doing Tom Cruise things, because why not? But it was it was an awesome Olympics, and I'm all in, man. Like I kind of had a little bit of time in my life in which I was not all in on the Olympics, and I am brought back. I'm like I felt so patriotic watching this last like 2.5 weeks. It was incredible.
Yeah, I think Paris showed exactly, when a big city, was able to host. I think they did an amazing job hosting. I think the visuals are amazing. I think Paris does a great job. I mean, opening ceremony a little bit weird, right? We didn't really talk about that. People were not fired up about that. I get it.
Disconnected, like not for everybody. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. I personally, if you're ever gonna cut to a beheaded tyrant from that to like Viking death metal, I'm in personally. I'm not going to speak outside of any of that part of it, but that part of it I liked. I think that's interesting because you talk about 96. I think that was a big crossroads for the city of Atlanta, right? Because you could talk about how Atlanta was kind of seen as not exactly a tier 1 city before that, but then all these things happened at the same time. Ted Turner was CNN, the Braves becoming this big power, Southern hip hop, talking about Outkast, T.I., all that stuff. Living in Atlanta, a lot of the things that I love about Atlanta came from that huge surge coming like in the early to mid 90s, where Atlanta was just a cultural center of all this stuff, and it hasn't stopped in a lot of ways, right? You still hear, Drake getting dissed for, run to Atlanta. So like point being, like it was such a big moment for Atlanta, but LA is not. They don't need that. There's no crossroads for LA. It's going to be a lot more like Paris, which is okay. Let's show the best example of this. Let's show maybe we'll build 40 lanes of traffic this time. I don't know what they're going to do, but there's nothing to really improve the city. It's as big as it can be. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the local municipalities kind of change everything around to make it the best it can be, because Paris really set a high bar.
Yeah, driving around in LA during the Olympics, buddy, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck. That is not going to be fun. But yeah, very much looking forward to those games in 4 years. Olympics being over means, hey, our next sport is college football. We're less than 2 weeks away from college football, Will.
I'm going to be in Vegas watching a disappointingly ranked USC team.
I'm sure things will go perfectly fine for Brian Kelly. Week 1, Sunday nights. Nothing bad will happen at all for LSU. Will has already vowed, by the way, to never go to an LSU opener again if they lose this one. That'll be his sign.
I'm done watching Brian Kelly on Sundays. This dude, this is the third one of these in a row. We're 0-2. I thought we was go win the first one. I thought we was going to win the second one. Now everybody's mad at me because I'm saying we're going to lose the third one. You can't. You know what George Bush said? You fool me 3 times, you can't get fooled again. All right? So I got to get one of the – at least I'll be trying something new. All right? And if they prove me wrong, if Brian Kelly could just never make me happy on a base level, if he always got to do something weird, then at least I'll get my pick wrong and we'll win. That's fine. But I can't do this again. It's the definition of insanity at this point.
Will's just begging for a dub. I love it. That's when you know we're in midseason form. Very much.
Oh, yeah.
All right. If you have not, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Set Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.